This happened when I was a freshman in high school. I was a young 15-year-old girl, immature for most of the school year. Things went pretty well. Later on, towards the end of the year, I had gotten used to being in high school. I remember that one Friday afternoon, after school, I was leaving to head to my bus. There were quite a few other people around, mostly students also leaving the school. When I was walking along the sidewalk just outside the school, this guy came up to me. I didn't recognize him or know who he was, but I figured that he was an upperclassman, maybe a senior, possibly a junior. He said, "Hi, how's it going?" or something like that. Then he asked me if I was doing anything later. I did not have any plans. He told me that there was going to be a big party that night and said that I should go. Then he gave me an address and I wrote it down in the notes on my phone. After that, I had to catch my bus, and the guy said that he would see me tonight. He told me that everyone was going to be there. Now, I hadn't known the guy, but to me, he looked like he was probably popular, and the fact that he was an upperclassman made him seem cooler. Admittedly, I wanted to be cool, and I didn't want to miss out on a big party. At that time, I had never been to an actual party before, just some small get-togethers with people in my friend group. No official house parties or anything. I didn't know why the guy seemingly randomly asked me, but I didn't really care about it either. I also did not ask any of my friends if they had been invited, because if they hadn't, I didn't want them to get mad. When the time came, I looked up the address. It wasn't that far away. Maybe 7 or 8 minutes. I got my older sister, who was 17, to drive me there. I would always get her to drive me places. She dropped me off in the neighborhood, and it looked kind of sketchy. It was a quiet neighborhood without many lights. I walked up to the property and could see a house deep in the yard. In this neighborhood, most of the houses were fairly far apart and had large-sized properties. I double-checked the address, and it was definitely correct. I walked onto the property. There were no cars around, and all the lights in the house appeared to be off. It was like nobody was home, but I figured that, with it being a house party for high schoolers, they didn't want it to be obvious. Most likely, the party was in the basement, or else they purposely had the front lights off to avoid alerting any neighbors. As I walked up to the house, I still heard nothing. It was completely silent. I would have thought that if it was a party, there would at least be some music in the distance or something. When I got to the doorstep, I didn't want to knock or ring the doorbell. That's not really something you do at a house party. They would probably think the cops were there if I did. I stood there on the front step, looking around for a few moments. Then I decided to try the door. When I did, it was unlocked. I slowly opened the front door and saw a pantry and part of a living room. All the lights were indeed off. The house looked pretty average, from what I remember. I stepped inside and started to walk around to try to find the basement. It was still completely quiet, and the farther I walked into the house, the stronger the bad feeling I got. I was already a little nervous about going to a house party where I didn't think I would know anyone. As I was walking in the house, I suddenly heard footsteps that were coming from the other room and heading toward me. I couldn't see who it was, and for whatever reason, my instant reaction was to just leave. I turned around and bolted back for the front door. I made it there, walked out, and left the house. Then I walked back to the street. When I got there, I looked back at the house. I saw a man looking at me from the window. He was not the same guy that I had talked to before. This man looked like he was in his 30s. He had a goatee beard, was wearing a hat, and just stared at me. He didn't say anything or come outside. I walked down the street and called my sister. She wasn't far away and came back to pick me up. Thankfully, she was confused because I had told her I was meeting friends there. I told her what happened, and she scolded me for trying to go to a random party, but she agreed not to tell our parents. After that, I never saw the guy who invited me to the party again. In all my years of high school, I never found out who he even was. It makes me wonder if that guy was even a high school student at all. Maybe it was all a setup. There was definitely no house party going on there. I'm just glad that I made it out of there, and I learned my lesson from that experience. This happened back on the night of my high school orientation. I was entering the 9th grade and would be a freshman in high school. My best friend Mike and I went to the school orientation, and Mike's dad took us there. He was busy talking with another dad in the cafeteria, which was at the front of the school, while Mike and I went to the orientation. There was an event in the gymnasium where people welcomed us and gave a short introduction. Then we went to all the classrooms in our schedules to see where they were, and things like that. We also got a basic tour of the school. The orientation lasted for maybe 30 minutes or so. It really wasn't that long. After it was over, Mike's dad was still busy talking with the other dad. Mike and I decided to walk around the school some more and just shoot the bull. So we walked down the hallways first, looking for each other's classes. We did have one class together, which was cool. Then we went to our locker area. By then, pretty much everybody else was gone, and the hallways were completely empty. We walked through the school, and then to this one really quiet hallway. It was kind of out of the way and possibly not used anymore. I say this because it was not shown to us on the tour. And I will also tell you that I never had any classes in this hallway in my entire high school career. We walked into it, and barely any lights were on. Most of the lights in the school were motion activated, but when we entered this hallway, none of them turned on. There were just a couple of really dim lights at each end. We walked along the hallway, just kind of exploring. All the classrooms there appeared to be empty, and the doors were closed, although we couldn't see very well because it was pretty dark. We had made it a little ways down the hallway when we heard a noise toward the end of it. Somebody was down there. I figured at first it was probably a janitor. Then we heard them speak. It was a man's voice, and he yelled at us to come over there. I didn't know if we were in trouble or what. He didn't seem angry, but he yelled fairly loud. I also couldn't see where he was. It seemed like maybe he was inside one of the classrooms. We walked down there, and as we got closer, we noticed there was one classroom at the end of the hallway with the door open. We knew this was where the guy was. We got to the doorway and looked inside. It was completely pitch dark. Then the man spoke again. "Come in here, you guys." We both walked in, and I literally could not see anything. I looked around inside the door for a light switch, but I couldn't find one. We were just a few steps inside the classroom, standing around. Mike called out, asking where the guy was. There was no answer. We were just standing there, really confused. Suddenly, I felt myself get grabbed by the arm. I couldn't see anything, so it really took me by surprise. I moved my arm back really fast and turned around. Mike saw me moving quickly, and he started to leave the room as well. We both bolted out of there as fast as possible. We ran to the end of the hallway, and then all the way back to Mike's dad, who was still talking with the other dad. The guy who had called to us did not appear to leave the classroom. We stayed near Mike's dad for the next 30 minutes or so, until he was done talking. Then we left. Like I said before, in my entire high school career, I never had a class in that hallway. For the whole freshman year, I would sometimes walk by the narrow entrance to that hallway and remember the creepy experience. It was a hallway that was not used. After my freshman year, they closed the doors to the hallway and blocked it off. Then, the year after I graduated, they renovated the entire school and either demolished that part or turned it into modern classrooms. By the way, I still don't know who that man was or what exactly was going on there. It still gives me the creeps to remember it though. Back when I was in high school, during my sophomore year, I used to go to the local library a lot after school. I lived pretty close by to the high school, behind it in a neighborhood. I would walk to school every morning, and then after school there was a city library really close by that I liked to go to. It was in the opposite direction from going home, but it was literally like a 5-minute walk from the school. You just had to cross the street and then go a little ways down. The high school did have a library, but I found it to be kind of lame, and some of the school clubs would meet in there after school anyway, so I preferred to just go to the city library. I would usually spend about an hour or two there, sometimes more. I would try to do all my homework as well as studying there, so that when I went home I could do whatever I wanted. It was easier to focus in the library, and I also found it to be pretty relaxing. The city library was nice. It was large, had every book you could want, and also had a lot of tables for studying, as well as several computer labs. One day during that sophomore year, classes let out for the day, and I walked across the street and down to the library. I went inside and then went towards the back, where I found an open area with a few tables, kind of out of the way. There was nobody else there, and it was my favorite spot to do homework. I sat down, took out my books and folders, and began working. Probably about 10 to 15 minutes into this, some guy walked up to me. I remembered that he had a red t-shirt on and dark brown, really short hair. He looked young, but to me he seemed maybe around 25 or so. He didn't seem like a teenager at all. He did, however, have a backpack with him, so I thought that maybe he was a college student. Either way, I had never seen him before. He walked right up to me and mentioned my high school, asking if I went there too, which implied that he also went to my high school. I had never seen this guy before, like I said, and I wouldn't have guessed that he was a high school student at all. I said, "Yes, do you go there?" He said yes, and then asked if I minded if he did his homework in that area as well. I didn't want him to, but I also didn't want to be rude, so I said sure. I was only using one of the tables when there were like 5 of them there. He didn't really have to ask permission to use one. The guy walked around me, and then went to the table directly behind mine. I couldn't see him anymore now that he was behind me, but I heard him sit down. It seemed as though he was sitting directly behind me and facing me. I just continued with my homework, and it was completely silent. I was able to work for about 10 minutes or so, but then I realized that I hadn't heard the guy do anything. He hadn't taken anything out of his backpack. No books, no laptop, no notebooks or pencils, and he wasn't making any sounds at all. I was making a little bit of noise with turning pages, writing things down, and so on. But there was nothing from the guy. He seemed to just be sitting there behind me, doing nothing, and I got the sense that he was staring at me. That feeling you get when somebody is watching you. I didn't want to just turn around, so I tried to be slick. I stopped to stretch and sort of looked around at another spot behind me, out of the corner of my eye. I saw the guy. He indeed had nothing out. There were no books or anything on the table in front of him, and he wasn't on his phone either. He was just sitting there, seemingly looking at me. It seemed weird. I tried to ignore it and kept working, but the longer I did, the more paranoid I became. The guy didn't do anything at all. He was just sitting there. I turned around again, and this time got a better look. He was looking at me, then looked away right after we made eye contact. There was still nothing in front of him, and his backpack was still on his back. By this point, my focus was gone. I could no longer concentrate on what I was doing. I just wanted to leave. I sat there, staring at my homework paper for about 5 more minutes, not being productive at all. Finally, I decided to leave. I pretended to finish, then started packing my things. The man was still sitting there and didn't move the whole time I did. After putting everything back in my backpack, I stood up, picked up my bag, and began to walk away. I didn't look at the guy, but from the corner of my eye, I saw him stand up as well. That's when I had a really bad feeling. I walked to the front of the library and left. When I was about 20 feet out, I heard the doors open and knew it was the same guy. I walked quickly to the sidewalk, then breathed a small sigh of relief when I saw him getting into a car in the parking lot. I kept walking and was now on the sidewalk going home. I went down the street and crossed back toward the school. Shortly after I passed it, I saw the same car the man had gotten into driving up the road to pass me. Then it went a ways ahead and turned into a small parking lot. This lot was for a park across the street from the school, but it was also used for extra school parking. By this time, it was completely empty. As I continued to walk, I saw the car park in a spot facing the street. The man didn't get out. I kept walking, just hoping to get away from him and never see him again. Eventually, I passed the lot. It was on the other side of the road, so I didn't get a good look at him, but I knew he was still inside, and the engine was still running. I only had to pass a couple more streets before turning right onto mine. As I walked, I noticed the car leaving the parking lot. It backed out of its space, then headed toward the road again. I felt like the guy was going to follow me, so I quickly turned into one of the nearest streets. I heard the car on the next street, getting closer. I went down the residential street and up the first driveway I saw. There were some trees in the front yard, so I ran up and hid behind one. I saw the car turn into the street and drive very slowly. When it passed me, it kept going, but I waited until it was almost out of sight before moving. Then I quickly ran from behind the tree back toward the sidewalk. I made it there and started sprinting for my street. I got close, but then saw the car starting to come down my street from the other end. It must have wrapped around, since all the roads over there were connected. I ran back, turned onto the next street over, and hid in another random person's front yard. I waited until I heard the car moving away. Eventually, I turned onto another nearby street, then ran again, this time making it to my street once more. I ran to my house and was finally able to make it inside. I locked the door, then looked out the front window and saw the car driving by again, very slowly. But I don't think he knew which house was mine. After that, I never saw the guy again. Looking back, I know he didn't go to my school. He was far too old to be a high school student. That was one of the creepiest encounters I've ever had, and I'm glad I got away from him. This happened back when I was in high school. It had to be either my freshman or sophomore year, because those were the only 2 years that I rode the bus. School started at 7:45 a.m., but the bus would come by my stop to pick me up at 6:30. Well, it was supposed to be 6:30, but the bus would often show up more like 6:50 or even 7 o'clock. To get to the bus stop, I would walk down my street to the end of it. Then the bus would stop there, and I would get on. I was the only kid at that particular stop who rode the bus, and there weren't any other stops in the immediate area. It was a pretty quiet area because in my neighborhood, the yards were a little bigger and the houses farther apart. There was less traffic on the roads as well, especially at those hours. Across the street from the bus stop were some woods and houses spread out pretty far. So one morning, I walked down my street to the end where the bus stop was. I got there at about 6:30, but figured I would probably be waiting for a good 10 or 20 minutes like normal. I'm not sure why the bus was always so late, because my stop was only the third one of the morning. Every now and then the bus would show up perfectly on time though, so you could never depend on it to be late. I stood out there in the dark because the sun hadn't come up yet. It was very quiet, and there were no other cars on the roads at all. I waited and waited. I was pretty tired from having to get up so early, like I often was in high school. Then I noticed headlights in the distance. I figured that it had to be my bus. When it came closer, I noticed that it was, in fact, a bus, but not mine. It looked different. It slowed down when it got closer to me. Then I noticed that this was not the typical bus. My bus was the normal standard yellow school bus, but this one was like a really light yellow, almost white. It was slightly shorter than usual and looked older and more beat up. Now, in the past, one time we had a different bus for whatever reason, and I had a substitute bus driver once as well, so I thought that maybe that was the case. But when that happened, the bus had actually looked newer and in better shape. Something about this just gave me a bad feeling. The bus slowed down even more, and then came to a stop right across the street from me. For me to get on, I did not cross the street. I started to get a bad feeling like I should not get on the bus. I looked and could see the driver. It was not the usual bus driver that we had. This guy had a dark grey, and also partly black, beard. He was wearing a hat as well and looked over at me. I just kept standing there. Then he waved at me to get on the bus. I almost went. I think I might have even taken a step, but I thought better of it. I stayed where I was and then waved for the bus to go forward without me. It did not. The bus driver had the door open, and he shouted for me to get on. I looked in the windows and could see that there appeared to not be any other kids on the bus at all. Normally there would be 3 other kids on the bus at that point, as I was the 3rd stop and one of the stops before me had 2 kids at it. So this was just really weird. I said no, and then turned around and started to walk away. I was going back towards my house, and then something unexpected happened. As I was walking back down my street, I heard the bus turn onto my street behind me. I looked back, and it was indeed going onto my street, something that had never happened before. At that point, I started to run. That's when the bus stopped. I then heard the beeping as it backed up, and then it turned around and went back onto the busier road in the direction that it had come from. I was so confused. I stopped and then went back to the bus stop, feeling really creeped out now. That bus was nowhere in sight anymore, as it had driven away. I stood there in silence, wondering what had just happened. I was glad that I didn't get on that bus though. I figured that if it was somehow the bus I was supposed to be on, I could tell my mom that I missed it, and she would drive me to school. That was something that happened a few times before, and even though it took my mom out of the way to get to her job, she could still do it. I stood there at the bus stop, and the time approached 6:50. Then I saw more headlights. Another bus drove down the street. I thought at first that it was the same bus coming back, but it wasn't. This was actually my correct bus, the same one as usual. I saw a few students on already, and the bus stopped for me. I crossed the street and got on. It was the normal bus driver and students. I don't think I was ever so happy to see them before. I got on the bus, went to my seat, and then rode the bus to school, wondering what would have happened had I gotten on that other bus. I never saw that other bus again. To this day, I wonder who it was driving it, and why he drove to my stop. Was it something innocent, like a substitute bus driver who just got lost or got his route mixed up? Or was it something terrible, like a kidnapper trying to pose as a bus driver? I'm not sure, but I'm so glad that I listened to my instincts and didn't get on that bus. I went to a pretty average high school. There were maybe 900 students total, and the school was 2 stories tall with a bunch of classrooms. This was during my junior year. It was a normal school day, and I don't remember a whole lot about the day prior to this. It was my 3rd hour class, which was a history class. The classroom was on the 2nd floor of the school, in this quiet and narrow hallway. These classrooms had carpet floors and always felt cozier than the other ones to me. This class was not a standard history class either, but some type of advanced elective. I don't remember the exact name of it. It was a long time ago, but the teacher was really cool, especially with our class, because it was a small class. There were maybe 15 of us total in the class, as opposed to the normal class size of about 30 kids. There was no seating chart, so we would sit wherever we wanted. This teacher, who I will call Mr. M, was a pretty cool guy. He had been teaching at the school for many years, and most people liked him as far as I'm aware. His room was rather cluttered, but I didn't mind at all. In the back of it were these large closet-type cabinets, and there were tons of posters on the wall. He had other kinds of knickknacks and trinkets all around. So, I got to my typical seat for the class, which was at the far back of the room. There was nobody else who sat behind me, and I could focus better, kind of by myself back there. On this particular day of class, Mr. M put on a video for us to watch. There was a worksheet to go with it, and we all watched the video. It took pretty much the entire hour. Things were very quiet, and the lights were out in the room, so we could see the screen better. The only real sounds were coming from the video, which was a documentary. I remember though, during the film I heard some noises behind me. They were pretty quiet, and I couldn't hear them that well, but it sounded like somebody was in the classroom behind me, except nobody was. I was in one of the last rows and even looked back, but nothing was there. It was sort of confusing. The noises continued on and off for almost the entire hour. After a while, I chalked it up to them being from the next classroom over. After the film was done, we talked about it a little bit, turned in the worksheets, and were then dismissed. I headed out with all the other students and went back towards the locker commons. However, when I was almost back at my locker, I realized that I didn't have my phone. It must have fallen out of my pocket when I was in the history class. Realizing this, I headed back to the room. When I got back, the door was closed. I didn't bother knocking, but just opened it. When I did, I suddenly saw this random guy fighting Mr. M. When I opened the door, he stopped for a moment and looked at me, then continued, seemingly trying to fight Mr. M. Mr. M yelled for me to call the police. They were near the desk, and this guy did not appear to be a student, but he did look fairly young. I looked and saw my phone on the ground by my desk. I couldn't call the police because I didn't have my phone in hand yet. I was just standing there frozen, unsure of what was going on. The man threw a few punches, and Mr. M was blocking them. Finally, I came to my senses. I went into the room and tried to break up the fight. I went to pull the guy off Mr. M, but he was stronger than me. Mr. M was able to break free just enough though. The guy was big, also bigger than Mr. M, but my teacher then grabbed the guy and made him fall backward. Then he got on top of him and pinned him to the ground like a wrestler. He told me again to call 911. I went over, grabbed my phone, and hit 911. Then I ran out and got the attention of some other nearby teachers. They were able to help out and hold the guy down until the cops got there. It was a crazy scene, and the school got locked down for a little while. It turns out the noises I heard behind me were that guy. He was hiding in one of the cabinets at the back of the classroom. I'm not sure why he hated Mr. M, but he did. He must have snuck in there before classes started, or maybe when Mr. M left the room for a moment. It's really crazy to think back to it now. When class was over, he came out and attacked him. I'm glad that I went back when I did. Luckily, nobody had any serious injuries, just some scrapes and bruises. The guy was arrested, and the school day was able to resume as normal.